All right, today we're jumping into one of the most intense and pivotal moments of the Chaco War, the Battle of Boquerón. This is a story about unbelievable hardship, sheer desperation, and a final moment that, honestly, no one saw coming.
So let's dive right in. Because this isn't just about a battle. It's about the journey to get there, which was a kind of hell in itself. It's about what the soldiers endured and an encounter at the very end that is just mind-blowing.
First things first, before a single shot was even fired, you have to understand the journey. We're talking about the grueling trek the Paraguayan soldiers had to make in September of 1932 just to reach the battlefield.
Just look at this. This wasn't some quick ride to the front lines. It was this punishing three-part nightmare. First, thousands of young men packed onto boats up the Paraguay River. Then, they crammed into a narrow-gauge train for 160 kilometers into the heart of the Chaco. And the final leg? They had to walk dozens of kilometers through a brutal, unforgiving desert.
So you have to ask, why go through all that for this one spot? Well, Boquerón was absolutely critical. It was held by the Bolivians, and it was a strategic hub, the center of a network of forts. It was also right next to these prosperous Mennonite colonies, and was seen as a key point for expanding the railway. For Paraguay, taking it back was non-negotiable.
Okay, so now we get to the battle itself. And let me tell you, it kicked off not with some clever tactic, but with a full-on frontal assault that turned out to be incredibly, tragically costly.
The date is September 9th, 1932. The order is given. Thousands of Paraguayan soldiers begin to charge, heading straight for the fortified Bolivian positions.
So you've got this force, 4,500 men, launching this massive attack. They're determined to take back this strategic point. But what happens next is just an absolute catastrophe.
In that first assault, charging through an open patch of ground called the Cañadón, the Paraguayans took around 2,000 casualties. Just think about that. Nearly half their attacking force was killed, wounded, or just vanished into the desert after the attack completely fell apart.
And this slide right here shows you exactly why it went so wrong. The Paraguayans were just charging across open ground, completely exposed. Meanwhile, the Bolivians were dug into trenches and had even set up machine gun nests up in the trees. It was a tactical disaster for the attackers.
For the soldiers who survived that charge, their situation was just desperate. The accounts from the time describe them frantically trying to dig foxholes for cover with whatever they could find, their dinner plates, their spoons, and when all else failed, just their bare hands.
After that catastrophic opening, the whole nature of the battle changes. The big charges were over. It became this grim, brutal siege that just dragged on for 20 agonizing days.
And during this siege, the Chaco Desert itself became the main enemy. For both sides, they were all trapped in the same hell. A scorching sun, unbelievable heat, and this terrible, all-consuming thirst. It said that just as many men died from dehydration as from bullets. Their only water sources were literally becoming contaminated with the dead.
And this is the turning point. It all came down to a numbers game. Paraguay managed to bring in another 5,000 reinforcements to tighten the siege. But the 670 Bolivians inside the fort, they were completely cut off. Their own reinforcements, 3,500 men, couldn't break through. They were trapped with zero hope of resupply.
And that brings us to the climax. After 20 days of this absolute horror, with the Bolivian defenders at the very end of their rope, the siege finally breaks.
On September 29th, it happens. A white flag appears over the Bolivian trenches. They were out of food, they were out of ammo, and their water was poison. They had no other choice. They had to surrender.
So just stop and think about it for a second. After all that death, all that suffering, after watching nearly 2,000 of your comrades get cut down, what do you expect to happen next? Raw hatred? Vengeance?
But that is not what happened. As the starving, exhausted Bolivian soldiers came out of their trenches, something incredible happened. The Paraguayan troops met them with compassion. This quote from a survivor says it all. "We embraced. There were people crying. A meeting of true friends."
And that moment, it just laid bare this profound truth. This war had its reasons, maybe political, maybe economic, but the personal hatred just wasn't there. Not between the men who were actually forced to fight it. Face to face, they were just fellow human beings who had suffered together.
So what happened after the surrender? What were the echoes of this brutal battle for the men who somehow managed to survive it?
Well, those 670 Bolivian survivors who surrendered were now prisoners of war, and their own long journey was just beginning.
And here's the really poignant, almost unbelievable twist. Their journey as prisoners to the capital, Asunción, followed the exact same path the Paraguayan soldiers had taken to get to the battle. On foot, by train, and by boat. The very same road, just in reverse.
But you know, even after all the fighting stopped, the struggle for these men wasn't over. And that brings us to the final, lingering question, one that comes straight from the source material. For the veterans on both sides who survived that living hell, did they ever get the fair treatment and the dignified compensation they deserved? That's a question that really sticks with you.